A very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're from. I welcome you all to the third episode of PAM Masterclass, which is our exclusive product training series specifically designed for ManageEngine Password Manager Pro and PAM360 customers. This masterclass is intended to help you understand the PAM solutions in depth, and also you can make use of them to address your everyday use case, the PAM use case and the challenges. My name is Damo. I'm one of the lead technical consultants from ManageEngine PAM suite of products. So before we begin, I have few housekeeping announcements for you. All the attendees are muted by default, and if you have any questions during the masterclass sessions, feel free to leave them on the Q&A panel, and those questions will be answered at the last. The session recording will be sent to all the attendees within a couple of days, and you can also send your feedbacks on this session, or if you have any questions or queries, feel free to raise them on the email ID listed on the screen, hello-pam360@manageengine.com. And today's topic is about privilege elevation and delegation management. So why do we need a privilege elevation and delegation management for an organization? So before we answer this question, we need to know what is this privilege elevation and delegation mechanism. The PEDM is necessary for any organization because it helps to maintain a proper access control and minimize the security risk associated with any privilege accounts we have in the organization. So there are several reasons why we say PEDM is essential for an organization that you want to maintain and secure and with the robust security, cyber security postures in place. The first one being restricting unregulated access to the privilege accounts. So as we know, privilege accounts provide elevated access to the critical systems and the sensitive data we have in the organization. Suppose if these accounts fall into wrong hands, it can lead to a catastrophic breach, right? So PEDM helps to ensure that only authorized personnels can access these personal accounts, and those activities are monitored and audited. The second one and the most important one would be to enforce the principle of least privilege for all the critical systems in the environment. This principle of least privilege means that users and application should only have the minimal level of access required to perform their task in their system. So by enforcing this principle, we can reduce the attack surface and limit the potential damage that a cyber attacker can cause in an organization. And the other most important thing would be like maintaining a zero standing privilege in an organization. So as we know, standing privilege refers to access that was granted permanently for an extended period of time. So this type of access can create a significant risk because it can be revoked even if the user job function changes, or even if the user leaves the organization. It ensures that all the access is granted on a need to know basis, and it is a time limited access, right? And the fourth one is the secure systems from the internal and external threats. So PEDM helps to identify and mitigate the threats from both the internal as well as the external sources. So by monitoring and analyzing the activities across the IT environment, it can also detect and respond to the suspicious behavior and potential security breaches happens within an organization. Last but not the least, reducing the potential impact of a successful attack. So even with having a security measures in place, there is always a risk of secure cyber attack in an organization. So this privilege elevation and delegation management is going to help us to reduce the potential impact of a breach by limiting the attacker's access and preventing them from moving laterally across the network. So in summary, PEDM is one of the most important and a crucial part of a comprehensive the cyber security strategy that helps the organization to protect the critical systems and sensitive data from the cyber threats. Okay, so this is one of the impact of not having a proper PEDM in an organization. So this is an incident which happened in the east coast of United States back in May 2021. The Colonial Pipe incident in May 2021 was a cyber attack on a major US fuel pipeline that caused a widespread of disruption and a fuel shortage across the east coast. Well, there were multiple factors that contributed to this attack. One of them was indeed due to a lack of proper privilege elevation and delegation management. So, in the case of Colonial Pipeline, the attackers were able to gain access to the company's IT network by exploiting a weak password on a VPN account. So once they were inside the network, they were able to use the stolen credentials to gain access. I mean, to gain the elevated access and move laterally across to the systems to encrypt the Colonial Pipeline's critical data and the system, which cost around like $4.4 million to restore their operations. So this completely proves that a proper PEDM solution could have neglected this loss. So this is why we from PAM Solutions always recommend having a proper PAM solutions with PEDM in place to neglect such attacks in an organization. PAM 360 as a product provides multiple functionalities using which you can make sure your organization is completely secure. So first of all, what is this ManageEngine PAM360 solution? So PAM360 is a specific PAM solution offered by ManageEngine, which provides like various features and capabilities for securing privilege access across the organization. Now let's quickly discuss the important features in PEDM with PAM, which PAM360 offers. So the first one being advanced access control overflow. So this feature allows the administrators to define and enforce granular access control for the privilege accounts. This also includes defining who has access to what resource, setting up a role-based access control, and defining them with time-based access policies across the organization. And the second one and most important one is to maintain a proper command control functionality. So this feature enables administrators to monitor and control the commands that privileged users execute on their critical systems, right? So it also allows you to real-time monitor who has access to what commands and what commands they are executing in the organization. So the next one and the most important one would be to maintain the just-in-time elevation. So this feature again enables administrators to grant uh, privileged access to users for specific period of time. So this we can make sure this reduces the risk of unauthorized access by limiting the window of opportunity for attackers to exploit the privilege accounts within the organization. So the next one and the last one would be the self-service privilege elevation. PAM 360 also offers the self-service privilege elevation functionality, so which enables administrators to configure self-service privilege elevation on a target endpoints with an agent-based approach. So when we say agent-based approach, all the other three functionality does not require any agents. However, the self-service privilege elevation does require an agent-based approach. So with access control enabled for accounts and resources where self-service privilege elevation agents are configured, self-service privilege elevation agents are configured, it will take precedence over the access control functionality. So this means we can log into the target missions and run specific type of applications like .cmd or .exe file or .msi, MSC, or even the batch files can run using this particular thing. Okay. Now let's quickly jump into the product and see how it works. Perfect. Okay, so the first functionality would be the advanced request release workflow. So which means I'm going to share a resource to a particular user who's a part of my organization, or he is a vendor who needs access to a particular mission to perform some particular operation. So upon approval from an administrator, the user should be able to view the password or make use of the password to do an RDP or an SSH session to a particular device. So this is what the advanced request release mechanism is going to help us to do in the organization. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to configure this in PAM 360 and what are all the levels of access control available in PAM 360. So the first one is account level access control, resource level access control. We can also do a fine grained custom restrictions using this access control functionality. We can also do some flexible schedule windows using this particular functionality. Now let's quickly have a look into how this works. I hope you guys can see my screen now. So I have selected few resources. The first one is to display how the access control functionality works and how to enable access control functionality in PAM 360. So all I'm going to do is, I hope you can see my product screen now. I'm going to click on the resource action button and navigate to. Now I'm going to share this particular screen, a particular resource to a user. So all I need to do is click on resource action button next to it and click on configure access control, which means I'm going to share the resource to a particular user and have them go through a request release mechanism. So which means I'm going to choose an administrator as an authorized administrator. So any request raised by the users has to be approved by this particular user. And just in case I don't want my users to go through this particular access control functionality, then I can very well go ahead and configure it in a way that all the users part of this. So let's say I don't want this guest user to access this. I mean, they don't want to configure access control. They have to bypass the access control. Then I can exclude this particular user as well. And the third and most important thing is an auto approval functionality, which can be configured for this resource if required. By default, any users will be able to request for password upon approval mechanism. But if I have excluded the user, they will bypass the access control functionality. Suppose, let's say I'm an administrator who is part of an organization and I do not want my users to request me for control during a particular period of time. So let's say I will not be available between evening 6 o'clock to morning 9 o'clock. So in that case, I can even go ahead and configure it in a way that stating that I'll not be available from morning 6, sorry, evening, whatever the time is. I can just go ahead and pick my time so that the request raised during this particular time will get automatically approved. So now let's quickly jump in as a normal user and see how it looks. So when I click on the resource name, I see that I have an option to request for the password. Upon request, I have two different options. Either I can request for the password for now or for later. So if I'm going to opt for now, the administrator will immediately receive an approval mechanism and he has to go for an approval. Or I can even go ahead and go for the later option where I need to choose from which time to which time I need access to it. And upon approval from the administrator, I should be able to check in the password. I'm going to go with the now option for installing an exe with a reason for installing an exe file and click on send. So once I click on send, the administrator will receive an approval notification and you can click on it and click on process request to process this request. He is not only going to get a notification in PAM 360, he will also be sent out with an email stating that there was a request raised. The administrator can now decide whether the user need access to it right now or on a later basis. Though the user has requested for access right now, the administrator can decide you should be able to access it only between this particular time and provide them with access. So for now, I'm going to just approve the request with the reason states approved. And once I log in back as an guest user, I should be able to see an option to check out for the password. So once I click on checkout, it clearly says that you will have exclusive access to this password only for 30 minutes of time. And once I click on checkout, I should be able to view this password or copy the password or make use of this open connection button to do an RDP session to the particular device. I do not have a right password stored here, so the session closes. Suppose if I have a right password, the session will be launched. So that's how the access control functionality works in PAM 360. Okay, so back to the PPT screen. I hope you guys can see the screen again. So now there is a functionality called just-in-time privilege elevation, which is one of the most important functionality which ManageEngine PAM360 offers. There are two different accounts we can elevate using PAM360. So either we can elevate the local account to a particular user group, or we can elevate the domain account to a particular user group using the just-in-time privilege elevation mechanism. So just-in-time privilege elevation features enable the administrators to grant privilege access to the users for a specific period of time. As we know that this reduces the risk of unauthorized access by limiting the window of opportunity for attackers to exploit the privileged accounts. So now here we are going to temporarily elevate privileges for the users to a relevant local groups. That's the first thing we are going to do. And the second thing is we are going to go for an agentless native approach here. So we don't need any agents to be deployed to do this functionality. However, to elevate privilege for a domain account, we need to integrate ManageEngine PAM360 with our AD Manager Plus integration. Now let's quickly have a look at this particular screen. So I'm going to log in as an administrator, and you could see that I have a few resources configured here. So talking about just-in-time privilege elevation, I have a resource configured here. So I'm going to click on we are going to first look at the local account using just-in-time elevation. So I'm going to click on the resource action and say configure access control. So here I have an option called privilege elevation where I can elevate it. So again, this functionality is available in resource level as well as in the account level. So when I talk about account level, if I click on the resource, I could see the list of accounts underneath that, and I'm going to configure it in the account level. So I can click on account actions and then say configure access control. Here I have an option to configure the privilege elevation. So it is on top of access control functionality. So I have all my details specified. So in access control, we also have an option to enforce at least. So here I might have selected only one authorized admin. Suppose I have selected two admins. I can even say enforce at least two administrators to approve the request. Enforce users to provide a reason while they try to retrieve the password. Send a reminder email to the administrators whenever the password is when the stipulated time about to expire, or even if the password is retrieved, I want the password to be automatically reset after the check-in process. So which means if a password is given to a user, there are chances he might write it with a pen or paper, right? So we need to make sure whenever we give them access to a particular password, the password has to be reset after a specific period of time. So these all falls under the access control. With just-in-time privilege elevation, we have an option to click on privilege elevation and elevate privilege by adding them to the local group. So all I'm going to do is click on select, which will display the list of groups available in my local mission. So on my local Windows mission, whatever groups I have picked two groups: power users and remote desktop users. So now I'm going to click on save and say save and activate. Now, if I try to launch a session using this user 2, I could see that there is a user 2 who should be able to, when I double click on this user, I could see which group he is a member of. I could say that he is a member of only two groups, which is administrator and users. Now, I have already shared this to a particular user, so I'm going to share the screen, and you could see that one moment. Okay, here. So here I'm going to launch, I'm going to request for the control first, stating that test, and I'm going to click on send to the administrator. Is going to approve the request, process the request, test again. And then once the request is processed, okay, I made it to approve by 2 different admins. So let me just go ahead and reconfigure it in a way that it requires just 1 administrator. So all I need to do is go back to the resource. Sorry, it is configured in the account level. So go back to the account, click on account actions, configure access control, and I'm going to remove the other user and click on save and activate. And here I have mentioned 2 administrators. So I can uncheck this option and leave it to 1. So now I'm going to go back as this particular user and refresh the screen. And the request is approved. Now the user is going to log in and click on the CAM DC and request for the password. Right. Click on checkout and the password is visible for the user now. Okay, so now the password is visible to the user. He should be able to do an RDP session from here. When this user does the RDP session, as we know, he is going to get an elevated access because we have already configured it to run with elevated access. By default, he is a part of only 2 different groups. And once he get the elevated permission, he will be getting, let me show the screen again. If I look at the properties of this user, as you could see that the user has been promoted with power users as well as the remote desktop users functionality now. I mean, he has been promoted as an to this particular group now. And once after this check-in activity, so you could see that the user has been promoted to power users and remote desktop users tab. And once I'm back to the tab, you could see that I'm going to do the check-in process. And once I do this check-in process, the session gets disconnected. I already have a session launched by the normal user, so I can go to screen and I'm going to share this particular, sorry, I'm going to launch a session using this particular user again. And if I look at the options, I could see that. So the screen is loading up and you should be able to see that the user will be demoted from that particular group. So if I do a double click and go to the member of, it should demote the users and they will have access only to the particular 2 user groups. So that's how the local elevation and delegation management works for the local accounts. So the next thing is, the integration with AD Manager Plus. So to integrate PAM 360 with AD Manager Plus, all I need to do is first navigate to Admin tab and then go to the ManageEngine integration where I already have an option to integrate with AD Manager Plus. So once I click on enable, I will be prompted with the required details like the host name and the port number in which the AD Manager Plus is running with. Once I provide these details and click on update, the integration is done. So all I need to do now is I need to pick a Windows domain resource with domain accounts underneath that. Now I should be able to click on the resource action button next to it and click on configure access control. Here, instead of privilege elevation, I will have an option called policy configuration. So I'm going to click on it and say elevate access. I already have this configuration done from the user level. So I'm from the account level. So let me show you how it works from the account level. So I click on this particular thing. I go out to the account actions and say configure access control. I should be able to see that there is an already configuration. So once I click on policy configuration, I'll be able to see and I will be able to provide an option to elevate the users to the particular security groups. And when I click on select, it will list all the security groups available in my AD manager. So I can pick the groups to which I want my users to be elevated. So suppose I want the user to be elevated to domain admins and account operators, I can just have them selected and click on save. So once after the setting is saved, I need to click on save and activate. So the setting is saved. I already have this account shared to a particular user. So I'm going to log in as that particular user and see how it looks. So I have an option to request for control. And before that, let me log in as an admin and show you what is the permission the user one has in the domain controller. So the session is launched. Meanwhile, let me go ahead and request control using the user one. So when I request control for it, there are three different options it would display. Either I need access to this particular domain controller alone, or to all the resources available in PAM360, or I'll also have an option to select which resource I need access to. So at this moment, I just need access to this CAMDC. So I'm going to select this and ask for to install an exe. I'm going to request for control. So once I click on send, the administrator will receive a notification to approve the request. So I should be able to process the request and say approved. And once I approve, the user will be elevated to domain. So he is a part of domain users group. As you see now, I have just approved the request. Now the user will check out the password. Upon checkout operation, if I go back and look at the screen, let me close this and reopen the temp user. And if I navigate to member of, you could see that the user has been promoted to two more groups, which is domain admins and account operators. Initially, the user was just a part of domain user group and he does not have access to domain admins or network or account operations group. So once the permissions is elevated, the user have access. Now I'm gonna check in the password and you could see what happens when I click on check-in. So once the check-in process is done, if I go back to the remote session and look at the permission the user has got, he will have access only to the domain user group. He is no longer a part of domain admins or any other functionality, any other groups available in PAM360. So this is how our just-in-time privilege elevation works when you have AD manager integration place. So I hope that explains how the AD manager integration works with domain accounts and how the local account integration, local account elevation works in PAM360. Now the next topic is about the command control functionality. So as we discussed, this feature enables the administrator to monitor and control the commands that privileged users execute on a critical systems. So here we can enable command controls on a device that supports SSH-based connections, like it could be a Linux device, it could be a network-based device which support commands, or we can also create a list of commands which can be executed on the particular mission. And this is going to be an agentless approach again, right? And most importantly, you need to have you need to make a note that this functionality will work for any user with connection user permission. I hope you might have went through our previous webinars which explains the roles available in PAM360 called admin, privilege admin, password user, password auditor, and connection user. So for this functionality to work, you need to make sure the user has connection user functionality in PAM360. Now let's quickly look in how this command control can be configured in PAM360. So as an administrator, again, I go to my group which I have created and I have command control functionality configured for this particular device. So I'm going to click on resource action and click on SSH command control functionality. And once I click on it, I have an option to associate my command groups. Either, so again, this can be configured in resource level as well as in account level. So I have configured this in the account level. So I'm going to click on the resource, which displays the list of resources I have. So I'm going to show you how I have configured command control for this particular account. So all I need to do is click on account actions and navigate to configure access, configure SSH command control. And once I click on it, I have an option to select the list of groups which needs access to it. So for example, I'm going to say basic administrator, webinar, admin task. So these are the commands group which I have created. So now we'll first look at how these command groups are configured before we do this configuration. So I need to go to admin and say manage commands. You can see the list of commands which we provide. We provide around like 40 to 45 commands by default. So for one of them is who am I, pwd, ls-ltrh. So all these list of commands will be available by default. Suppose if you wanted to add more commands, you can very well click on add, provide a name for the command and say ls-ltrh is my command which I'm going to use, and the description whatever you need, and then click on add. So the command will get automatically created. So once the command is created, you should be in a position to create a command group. So for example, I have a critical system on my environment for which I'm going to configure this command control functionality. In that mission, I want my users to execute only 15 different commands. So I'm going to click on add and type in the Linux command control and pick all those 15 commands which I'm going to execute on that particular mission, and then click on add. So once I click on add, the command groups get created. So once it is created, all I need to do is go to resources, look out for the resource or the account where I want to configure this functionality, click on account actions, and then click on configure SSH command sets. So I already have few things like basic administration, admin task, and I'm also going to pick the one which I have created, which is Linux command control 1. I pick them and click on associate. So once I click on associate, if I do an SSH session to this particular mission, I should be able to view the list of commands. I will not be able to type in anything here, as you see here. This is applicable even for the administrators as well as for the users. So for this missions, everyone should be able to execute only the commands which was provided to them. Suppose if I wanted to execute a command called ls, I can just click on this execute command. I want to execute who am I can just click on who am I, and it would show me the commands. Or I have a command to do some editing functionality like a VI command. I can just click on execute, which will open up the files which I need access to it. So that's how the command control functionality works. The next important thing when it comes to command control functionality would be enforcing a self-service privilege elevation for the command control functionality. We will look into it in detail within a minute. So this is how the command control functionality works in PAM 360. The next important thing would be the self-service privilege elevation mechanism available in PAM 360. So what is the self-service privilege elevation? How it works? Let me just give you two or a couple of examples of how this self-service privilege elevation mechanism works in PAM 360. So let's say I have a user who needs to perform a specific operation. So let's say a developer who needs to install a particular application on a remote endpoint, but he do not have a sufficient permission to do so. So we can leverage self-service elevation to execute the installer file using a privilege account in that particular endpoint. So that is one of the use cases. Let's take an example. You have a DBA in an organization who wish to perform database maintain operation using MS SQL Studio, but he do not have full access on the administrative rights to the endpoints, so in which the SQL instance is running. So we can again leverage self-service privilege elevation to run this MS SQL Studio using the privilege account elevation program, which we offer in ManageEngine PAM 360. So here we can grant a granular access for selected few applications or a commands on the target missions. And this is going to be an agent-based approach for both Windows-based device as well as for Linux-based devices. Okay, so have in mind, no other features which we discussed till now has agent-based approach, but the SSPE functionality alone has to go with agent-based approach. So all I need to do is download an agent from PAM360 and deploy it on the target mission for this functionality to work. For Windows devices, I need to create and allow or app scripts which can be enabled. And for Linux devices, I need to enable SSPE on the self-service privilege elevation on the resource on the user account. Now, first, let's look at how it works for the Windows devices, right? So let me log in back as an admin. I go to admin tab and you should be able to see the screen now where I have the list of agents available. So I can download the Windows agent and deploy it on the target mission, which I have already done. So you should be able to, I should be able to demonstrate how the configuration has to be done. So I have a mission in which I have configured self-service elevation for PAM360. All I need to do is click on resource action and say configure privilege elevation. And here I have an option to elevate using local account or a domain account. So as of now, I have chosen to elevate using a local account, and these are the allowed script. So what is this allowed apps or scripts? So let's quickly have a look into it. So I go to admin and I have an option to click on allowed app/script. So here I need to specify the applications for which I want my users to perform an elevated access. So let's say I picked an example as Notepad. You could also pick another examples with any extensions out here like MSI, EXE based applications, MSE based applications, CMD, and any batch file as well. So you could pick them and you need to provide their file name and the application file name. So which should be exact same name. If it is CMD, you should provide cmd.exe. And if it is once you get the SHA value for this particular application, you have to provide them here. So once you provide that, this is how it would look. So you will have a command name, the file name, along with the SHA value available here. So now I'm going to the resources tab and do the configuration. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on resource action, configure self-service privilege elevation, and say I want the particular CM command prompt to be elevated using this particular administrator account. Okay. I'm saying that this could either be a domain admin or this could either be a local admin. So in my case, I'm just choosing it to be a local admin for now, and then just clicking on update. And once I click on update, I'm going to launch a session using this particular user, or let me launch the session using a normal user and show you how it looks. I click on it and the user has to request for control. I'm going to request, and upon approval from the administrator will again get an approval notification. You can process it from here. And once the request is processed, he should be able to check out the password, and once the password is checked out, he should be able to launch a session to this particular mission, right? So once the session is launched, I'm gonna click on this command prompt, right? I'm gonna do a right click. You might have seen an option like open and run as administrator in your Windows based devices, right? So we have an option called run as PAM360 administrator. This gets enabled once the agent is deployed on the mission. So I'm going to say run as PAM360 administrator, and then it would make use of my local account, which I have configured to elevate the permission. So I'm going to say to install some or to execute some commands. And click on elevate. So once I click on elevate, as you see, the command prompt is launched. And I'm going to type who am I. It is going to show me that the session is launched using an administrator. Suppose if I just do a double click, it will open up a session, but when I type in who am I, it would show me that I logged in as user 1. However, I have elevated the command using administrator, so this shows up with the administrator account. This can be done not only for local accounts and even for the domain accounts, right? So let me close this session and check in this session. So that's how the self-service privilege elevation works for Windows-based devices. Now let's quickly look at how it works for Linux-based devices. So I have a Linux device called DMP-10.7, right? So I'm going to click on it. So let's log in as an admin and look at the configurations first. So I go to Resources tab and I see the DMP-10.7 mission for which I have configured command control as well as SSPE for Linux-based devices. So I'm going to click on Resource Action and say Configure Self-Service Privilege Elevation. So again, we have an option to configure this setting in resource level as well as in account level. But for this resource, I have configured it in the account level. So I'm going to show how the self-service privilege elevation is configured for this particular user. So I'm going to click on account actions and say self-service privilege elevation. And I have chosen the list of command groups which we have created. Maybe I can even add the command group which we have created today called Linux command control and click on update. Before I click on update, just make a note that here I'm going to use an administrative user who's called as test to elevate the permission. And I click on update and I'm going to launch the session. So once I launch the session, you could see that again, I'll be able to type in the commands here, but I should type in PAM elevate who am I. It shows test. But when I type it as who am I, it just who am I, it will just say I'm a test user. But when I elevate, when I use a command called PAM elevate and then type in the command, it runs the command using the test user, which is an elevated user, which is an admin user maybe. Okay. So all we need to do is if you configure self-service privilege elevation for Linux-based device, you need to execute a command PAM elevate space the command so that it will be elevated with the user account configured under PAM360. Now let me close this. We also have, you can also come up with the question, what happens if command control and SSPE is configured for a device? Let me show you an example, a classic example. I click on account actions and you could see that configure command control is also configured for this account. And also I'm going to configure self-service privilege elevation for this account using the test account. Now, if I try to launch a session for this particular mission, again, I will not be able to type in anything because access control will take precedence over the SSPE, which is self-service privilege elevation functionality. Here, you could see that the list of commands which I'm allowed to execute, like who am I can execute from here. I can also execute who am I with an elevated prompt. When I execute, it shows test user. But few functionalities will not be available under elevate because I haven't chosen that option during the configuration part. So anything which is available, I should be able to execute with a normal permission. And if I wanted to elevate and execute, I can also click on elevate and execute functionality and the session will be launched using that particular user account called test, right? So this is how the self-service privilege elevation functionality works in PAM360. So all you need to do is make sure that user accounts are properly configured on your environment with a strict uh, functionalities like command controls and self-service privilege elevation, which will make sure your organization is completely secure without any problem. Okay, so what we have learned today, so the best practice for configuring this, it would be like enforcing a proper application and command control functionalities. You need to make sure that you need to revoke excess administrative privileges provided to any administrators on your organization. So you need to implement the principle of least privilege in your organization. You need to conduct and audit all the privilege accounts and corresponding privileges and have them stored under a centralized repository. To do all this, all you need to make sure is have a proper PAM solution in place, which will make sure all your accounts are properly managed, right? Let me just quickly recap whatever we have discussed today during the session. So we have discussed the need of privilege elevation and delegation management along with its benefits. We have also seen how privilege and elevation and delegation management can be uh, achieved with PAM 360, with the ManageEngine PAM 360 product. We have also seen the access control functionalities, how many hours the users need access to it, what happens if the user does not make use of the password for the particular period of time. We have also seen the just-in-time elevation functionality available for local accounts as well as for the domain accounts. We have also seen the recently introduced functionality called command control and self-service privilege elevation, which is the command control is something which is available for SSH-based device, and the self-service privilege elevation is available for both Windows-based as well as Linux-based devices. Right? So I hope my session was helpful to understand how the privilege elevation and delegation management works in PAM 360. So overall, PAM 360 provides a comprehensive set of features for managing privilege access, including like advanced access control, command control, just-in-time access, and self-service privilege elevation. This features helps organizations to minimize the risk of security access or privilege abuse and to improve their overall security postures in their organizations, right? So if you have any questions or queries, feel free to raise them and I will be glad to answer them during the session. Okay, so I see the questions on my screen now. Can I access the previous episodes from your sites? Yes, we will send you a link using which you should be able to access it. I hope my colleague has already shared the link where you should be able to access the previous episodes like privilege account governance program. Even this session will be available in our YouTube channel. So whenever you have time, feel free to go through the other two sessions. So you will get to know how this tool works and all the functionalities available in PAM 360s will be available in this particular session. So guys, have any other questions? Is this webinar for password self-service? So this webinar is for privilege elevation and delegation management functionality. How to elevate your users to perform some specific operations, how to restrict the users from performing um, specific commands on a Linux device and other stuff. It is more of privilege account governance mechanism. Along with this PAM solution is more of implementing a proper privilege account governance program and the PEDM on your organization. So any other questions from anyone else?
Right. If there are no further questions, you can always email your questions and feedback of this session to hello-pam360 at manageengine.com, right? And if there are no further questions, before we end this session, just a quick note. The next episode of this year's PAM Masterclass training series will happen on May the 18th, and it'll be on privileged session management. It'll be about how to launch secure remote SH sessions, RDP sessions, how to make use of the thick client, how to monitor, shadow, and terminate sessions, and so on. So we look forward to seeing you there. We hope this session was very helpful. And May 18th is our next episode again, episode 4. We look forward to seeing you there.